Speaking of changing it up, the Indiana Pacers all of a sudden came out and said that all of their star players are reportedly on the trade block. So, Karis LeVert, Domantas Sabonis, Miles Turner, all three of those guys are available for trades. Now, the Indiana Pacers are 10-16 right now. They're 13th in the Eastern Conference, one of the 7 worst records in the NBA. And I'm not blaming Rick Carlisle, the new head coach, for all of this. There's something about the Indiana Pacers that I can't quite wrap my arms around. It's been the same question. They've had the same question marks around this team for years, and that is, who are the Indiana Pacers? Who are they? What are they? What's their direction? I just talked about the Blazers and what's the direction? What's the future ambition of the team? The same question can be said for the Indiana Pacers, but to a heightened level, because they've always been a huge question mark to me. They were always a passing grade. They've always had a lot of really good B-level players and also some C-level players. So a very kind of average, pedestrian, middle-of-the-road type of team. I really like Karis LeVert. I think he's got some great playmaking abilities on offense. I like Domantas Sabonis. The guy is a fundamental genius and a big man underneath the basket who can score with both hands. He's got a mid-range. And Miles Turner can stretch the floor, and he blocks shots and can be a huge defensive presence in the middle. Obviously, Malcolm Brogdon is another member of that kind of big four, but he's unavailable in trades because of the recent contract that he signed. And the NBA stipulates that if you sign a recent contract, there's certain kind of clauses that prevent him from being traded. So he's not on the trading block. But what's shocking about this team is the fact that, okay, they're 10-16. That's fine. That happens. You get off to slow starts. But they're behind the Raptors and the Cavaliers. The Raptors, they have more talent than. And the Cavaliers, they have much more talent than. Colin Sexton was just announced done for practically the season 2-3 weeks ago. And you're behind them. You're 13th in the Eastern Conference. You can't have a better record than that. So something's not right. And the big issue for them has been health. TJ Warren has had moments in the bubble. He looked like a superstar. Stress fracture in his foot. I feel like I never see him anymore. He's done for the year. TJ McCollum just underwent hand surgery to report torn ligament in his hand. He's likely done for the year. So 2 scrappy potential talents on your team are done for the year. And yet you still have a tremendous rookie in Chris Duarte, who's been playing really well, almost acting like the 4th or 5th horseman. And yet he, along with the other 4 guys that I mentioned, aren't enough, apparently. And so the problem is NBA organizations in today's era, they're not going to settle for incessant mediocrity and incessant complacency. That's not how they operate. NBA organizations are driven on the word potential star, potential future, the potential direction of the organization. They're driven by, sometimes it's a false reality or a false trail, but the hope of landing a star and that a star could potentially turn around an organization. An organization would much rather be a garbage team, but be able to look into the horizon and see a potential draft pick that can formulate into a star to change the organization than to just stay at mediocre. They'd prefer to do that. That's how NBA organizations are derived now. That's their motto. That's the approach, because they want to see that there's a path forward. You can identify a bunch of teams in the NBA, the Phoenix Suns, teams that think that they have a star or believe in a guy they're willing to invest in. The Phoenix Suns saw, we've got a star in Devin Booker, even when they were lousy and they were a bottom feeder in the Western Conference. They saw Devin Booker as a star. Oh, DeAndre Ayton is coming into his own. Let's trade for Chris Paul. Let's sign Jay Crowder. And all of a sudden, you flip those couple years, and they're in the NBA Finals. We saw that with the Washington Wizards. The organization believes that Bradley Beal is a star. Whether or not he can single-handedly lead Washington, D.C., or bring a title to Washington, D.C., likely can't. But right now, they went from a team who was one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. They traded for Russell Westbrook. They reached the NBA playoffs through the play-in. And now they're top 5 team in the East. During stretches of the season, they had the best record in the Eastern Conference this year. The Chicago Bulls, they saw that they had a talent in Zach LaVine. And even when they were struggling, they said, hey, you know what? We're going to build around Zach LaVine, ride this momentum. They make an aggressive trade for Nikola Vucevic. And then last offseason, they signed DeMar DeRozan and Alex Caruso. So when you see a star in your building, you're willing to go out and make big trades because you see a path forward, because you see some ambition, because you see some future potential, even though I do see potential in Chris Duarte, as a side note. But even the Minnesota Timberwolves, they identified early on, Karl Anthony Towns, this guy can play. Anthony Edwards is a star. He's emerging. He's coming into his own. Those two guys are playing well. Let's go sign D'Angelo Russell. Let's make a trade for him. Let's get rid of Wiggins. Because what we've seen, as I mentioned, is NBA organizations aren't just going to stand for complacency for the sake of complacency. The Memphis Grizzlies, for years under Grind City, with Zach Randolph and Mike Conley and Tony Allen and Marc Gasol, we loved those teams. They were gritty. They didn't back down to anyone. They showed tremendous toughness and resilience. We're always a tough out in the postseason and always finished somewhere between a 5 and an 8 seed in the Western Conference. At some point, yes, they had occasional good runs, but they never really broke through too much. And eventually, Zach Randolph and Tony Allen retired, and they traded Marc Gasol. And Mike Conley, while he was really good and always kind of that borderline all-star, eventually they let him go so they could sign Ja Morant and totally rebuild. And now Ja Morant is crushing it. So they went from, in 1 year, being one of the worst teams in the NBA. They signed they draft Ja Morant 2nd overall. And 2 years later, he's leading them to the postseason. So we saw, when an organization believes that they have a star player, doesn't matter what the age is, doesn't matter what the record of the team is, they are willing to go be aggressive and to go all in. The problem is, right now, the Indiana Pacers are in purgatory. We even see, the Sacramento Kings, who I thought had perhaps a superstar emerging and budding in De'Aaron Fox. I don't think they're convinced about him. There have been rumors and rumblings that they may look to trade De'Aaron Fox, because look at where the Kings have been the last 3 years. 2018, 2019, they were 9th in the Western Conference, so they just missed the postseason. In the bubble season, they were 12th in the Western Conference, 3 games back of 8, but only a game and a half back of the final play-in spot. And last year they were 12th and only 2 games back of the play-in tournament. So they're constantly kind of oscillating between 500, slightly below 500. And I think now the organization has said enough is enough. They fired Luke Walton, and now De'Aaron Fox might be gone. So if you're the Indiana Pacers, that's what's happening. Looking at the roster, they're saying, we don't see anyone that's a true game changer that's going to move the needle for us. Because unfortunately, most of those guys aren't going to, even though perhaps Chris Duarte might, and he'll be a part of their future. But with the core around Sabonis and Turner, and probably eventually Brogdon, once he is eligible to be moved, he'll be put on the trade block as well. They're going to ship those guys because they just don't see enough of a future. And there's going to be some teams that collect some major talents when the Pacers decide to move on from these guys and trade them. There have been rumors about the Warriors potentially trading James Wiseman for Miles Turner. That would be something special. I even think that the Philadelphia 76ers could trade Ben Simmons for some combination of LeVert, Sabonis, and a pick potentially. That's out of the real possibility. I think that could help both teams. So the Pacers are saying, listen, we just don't see a future, a path forward anymore. We don't want to remain mediocre. We'd rather be bad, but approach this the right way, have some kind of direction, than just be complacent for the sake of being complacent and somewhat relevant in the NBA. And that approach makes sense. And that's the era that we're living in with regards to the NBA. Just is.